All right, everyone, we're back with another video. Hopefully you enjoyed the last one as we switched up the style a little bit so that I feel like, a little easier to see everything going on. It's not as flippy back and forth. So hopefully that worked out well. We're back again, another week, and we are excited again. Like I said, missing you guys a lot. I really wish we can meet together in a normal way, but we cannot. So therefore, we will push on and try to be as effective and as driven to connect with one another in the ways that we have the ability to. So the previous weeks, like I said, we started with, as we're going through all these aspects of what it means to be a follower of Christ, we started with the first week being someone who's committed, someone who's obedient, someone who submits to Christ. Second week, we talked about that it's someone who knows what Jesus taught. The third week, we said it's someone who glorifies God. And then last week, we talked about it's someone who actively pursues community. So as we're coming to the end of this series, another topic we thought was really important to talk about, and I will say it's a little similar to if you were physically coming to youth group before everything happened, that we walked through something called interacting with the lost world. It's kind of similar to that, but I still think it's important for us to address it in this season of life. So the topic is that a Christ follower is someone who wants others to know Jesus or to know about Jesus. And this is a very interesting one because on the surface, it seems quite simple. Like knowing Jesus, right? That if I said, do you know someone? It's pretty easy for you to often give a yes or no answer. If I said, hey, do you know blah, blah, blah that goes to your school? Most of you might be like, yes. Or most of you might be like, no. But if I was like, do you know Tom Hanks? You'd be like, I know of him. Like, I don't personally know him, unless you do, and then that's awesome. I want to meet Tom Hanks, so I understand. So there's often in life, we give pretty yes or no clear answers to this question. Like, if I asked Adam if he knew Peyton, he'd be like, yeah, I know Peyton. But if I was like, hey, do you know my friend from Virginia named Devin? He'd be like, no, I don't know Devin. So it's interesting. So as we go into this topic, what we're going to define more than I think, or at first what we're going to define is what does it mean to know Jesus? And then we're going to move to, well, what does it mean to have a desire for others to know Jesus? So to start things off in the try and tested true way of me just launching into with a question to Adam. Adam, what do you think it means for someone to know Jesus?
Yeah. Like you just got done describing, right? That word "know" means a lot of different things. And sorry, I just had like on my face. Like there's different layers to that word "know," right? Like you can, like you mentioned, you can know of, you can know about, you can know facts, but then you can really come to know someone. So as we like, what does it mean to want others to know Jesus? It's that having them travel those layers, walk down those steps of that ever increasing intimate knowledge of who that person is. So knowing who they are, right? Like wanting to know Tom Hanks. We know who Tom Hanks is. We've watched his movies. We understand kind of those blips of his personality. Then taking that next step closer. Oh, we're gonna arrange a meet and greet. Like you're gonna go and you're gonna shake Tom Hanks' hand, and like you're gonna finally have that person-to-person contact with them. And then you take it further, and it's like, hey, now you're gonna hang out with Tom Hanks, and then in a month, we're going to have Tom Hanks adopt you. Like you'll have these different levels of knowing Tom Hanks in that process. And it's wanting someone to have a similar experience with Jesus, right? It's like, we want them to know who Jesus is. And then we want to introduce them to that the reality of what Jesus is in our life. Like he commands us, or he wants us to love one another. These are the acts of Jesus that we're doing in our lives. And then we want them to not only experience Jesus through us, but we want them to know Jesus themselves. We want them to know about what they've done, what he's done for them, how he addresses their inward guilt and shame that they might be experiencing, their longings for closeness and relationship and for connectivity and community. Jesus's sacrifice accomplishes all of those things because he brings restoration in a relationship that they're ultimately longing for, whether they know it or not. And then they come to know Jesus as we walk them closer, and they become adopted. Anyways, Serious Steps, crazy analogy. I think I got there at some point.
I mean, I want to get adopted by Tom Hanks, so I understand. But yeah, it's super interesting because I always use this analogy. I taught a lesson when I led a mission trip to Wales last year, and about a little over a year ago at this point. And I did a lesson over there, and I used this example with a lesson over there where there's knowing about someone, and I think Tom Hanks is a good example, but I always think athletics. So as someone who is really into sports like myself, I know a ton about certain athletes. Like I always use the example of Peyton Manning, like my favorite quarterback. I love him from a player perspective. Like you can have any opinion you want. He's one of the best.
You don't even have to add that from a player perspective qualify in there. You just love him.
Exactly. I do. But like, here's all the things I know about Peyton Manning. Like I know he has two brothers, Eli and Archie. And I know that like Eli was in the league and was successful in the league as well. But I know that Archie not Archie. Archie is dad. Cooper is his other brother. And I know that Cooper, some say it was a better football player than Eli and Peyton. But sadly, he had a disease that prevented him from being able to play long term. I know his dad is Archie Manning, who also played football and was also successful. I know Archie and Eli, I believe, went to Ole Miss, but Peyton went to Tennessee to play college. I know that Peyton played for the Colts, where I fell in love with watching him play, and then he played for the Broncos, and I still enjoyed watching him play. I know I know so many things about Peyton Manning. I know stats. I know Super Bowls he's won. I know records he holds. I know his play style. I know even some of his family members. I don't know Peyton Manning though. I've never met him. I probably never will, although that would be awesome. And I can't just call him up or text him. So I always use that example because those are the two different things about knowing Jesus. Is there are plenty of people that know about Jesus. I mean, we live in a country that has a lot of foundational Christian things. So people who grow up here often know who Jesus is. They know his name at least. They might know that he's related to Christianity. They might know, that he was a good guy. They might know that some people believe that he was the son of God. They can know all these things, but that doesn't equate, as Adam was saying, to knowing Jesus, to having an intimate knowledge, a relationship with him, being adopted by him. And this is really that dichotomy, I guess, or that two lanes of what it means to know, because some of us understand know as that first lane. And it's like, oh, I just need to be like, hey, do you know who Jesus is? Someone's like, I mean, I've heard of him. And you're like, job done. Awesome. That person knows Jesus. Move on to the next one. But the truth of the matter is, especially in your own lives, you're rarely going to find people who just have no idea who Jesus is. Yeah. So you're going to almost kind of cop out on this aspect of being a disciple if you think that's all it means to know Jesus. Now, when we go to the other side of it, though, a lot of that you can't personally control. You can't control when someone becomes gains an intimate understanding of Jesus and becomes into a relationship with him. But you can be directly influential in helping them to get to a place where they're ready to make that decision. Because ultimately, what did we talk about a lot of in the interacting with other people? We are the bridge between the lost world and Jesus. That's the point of us as disciples of Christ, as Christ followers. If you look at the Great Commission that me and Adam were talking about before we started this video, it says to go and make disciples. That's a command to us. That's not a command that's not like a royal command to the room. That's not a command to anyone who would uptake it. That's a command to all of Christ's people, to all of his followers. It's to go and be the ones making disciples. And when he says make disciples, he doesn't say you need to go save them. He says all authority under heaven and earth has been given to him already. So there's an understanding that that's where that's at. But what he does communicate, though, is it's up to us to be the ones that often bring people to know who Jesus is. So this is where that understanding of what it means for someone to know Jesus is important, because it's deeper than a superficial knowledge of him, but also you have to be able to just help people to come to know him. So now I feel like we need to switch into the second part of the conversation, which is, how do we do that? How do we, in our lives, if we understand that it's a deeper knowledge of him is needed than just aspects or attributes about him? And we also understand that we only can do so much before it has to be a decision on the person's part. So that middle ground, how do we effectively do that?
Yeah, I think it kind of touches on what we talked about in the last video, where it does require proximity, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's the first thing in my mind is in order to effectively lead someone to Jesus and to introduce them to Jesus, you actually have to have a close proximity to that individual. You have to have a relationship. I mean, I understand the struggle. I was a homeschooler growing up. I was a homeschooler from 3rd grade. My greatest excuse when it came to some of these conversations was, I don't know anybody. but that's not an excuse, right? We have to have those relationships. We can't be isolated from the outside world. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind, is that we have to have that proximity, that relationship. And then a couple of other random thoughts, like, again, 1 John tells us that they will know Jesus because we love one another. They will see from our example of living life in community, living life together, that, oh wow, there's something different about their relationship. They honor each other, they love each other, not just with a surface love, but they sacrifice for each other, which then opens up opportunities for us to tell about the hope that we have. Which that verse about always being ready to give a defense for the hope that you have, right now, especially when it comes to situations that we're in, we should be people of hope. And so in those relationships that we have, those close the proximity that we have with unbelievers, whether it be through text messages that we're getting from people that we used to see on a regular basis, and now we don't see them anymore. Like, we should have that hope, and that hope is because of what Christ has done, and because it opens up that opportunity to then teach what Christ has done to them. But any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, both of those statements kind of jog two things. One you've heard before, because I think I actually shared it with your small group probably right when I got here. But the first being that, like, almost again, a foundational principle for this entire thing that I mentioned on the first live stream and in every video since, is that all of these things we're mentioning require like active effort. Like to be a disciple of Christ is to pursue him every day actively. It's not a passive trait, or not a passive part of your life. So to take an example like Adam, that I know other people are in, where you're like, well, I don't know people. You're right. Like, Adam's exactly right. That's not an excuse, because God doesn't say share with the people who happen to be around you. God says, go and make disciples, share with people. And yes, does God put people around you sometimes that you weren't prepared for you to share with? Absolutely. But also, there is an active pursuit of interacting with people, engaging with people, finding methods to taking up activities to relate to people. I had an evangelism professor in college, and he was quite the character. But one thing I always respect about him a ton is, if he was in like a very peripheral way, came into contact with someone and felt like they needed Jesus, he would get really involved with whatever they were involved with. And the one that he told everyone about, and it was hilarious, is I don't remember how he met them, but he met a bunch of like competitive bodybuilding guys, and he got into like competitive bodybuilding so that he could like relate with them and like share Jesus with them. And he would always show in his class like a picture of him at like an amateur like bodybuilding competition, and we're all like, oh my gosh, like that's wild. And like, it's a fun story and we all laugh and everything, but ultimately what it comes down to is like, living sacrificially is going, listen, I have hobbies and stuff, and if you find people in those hobbies that are awesome, but also like, sometimes you meet someone and you have a heart to share something with them. You have a heart for them to know Jesus, and you have to go, how do I bridge that gap? Whatever they're into, I'm now into. Whatever they want to talk about, I'm now going to talk about. Whatever activity they're going to do, I'm going to be a part of now. And that's just, and it's so funny because like I said, sometimes I feel like it seems almost cringy in a way to like meet someone and like want to like be part of them. But also, like, isn't that what you do with all friendships? Like, friendships are either two things: you either meet someone you just like, so then you find ways to relate with them, or through a task or a skill or an activity you do, you find people you like and you bond over that. So it's no different for when we're trying to meet people with Christ. And then the other thing you were talking about with the idea of that there's no, when you said there's no excuse, and you were talking about that, and then the other thing you were talking about that I was reminded of with that they'll see the community we have, and that is a telling sign to them. And like I said, I mentioned this to you before, but I saw a internet forum post a while back that I had to read because the title of it was like, for those who aren't like religious, or for atheists, what is the thing that like you're jealous about like Christians? And I was like, I'm very intrigued to read this. And the number one, there were two top answers. One of the top answers that I saw consistently was like that they have belief in an afterlife, and it makes life seem a little easier to get through, which makes sense and I agree with. But the top answer by far was they said they belong to like a group. Like, there's people that care and love about each other. So like, these are people who are not believers. I can't emphasize this enough. Like, these are people who on any other day are going to crap on religion, crap on what you believe in, and say you're stupid and immature for believing that. And they're the ones that are like, I'm jealous of the fact that they have people. Like, I'm jealous of the fact that they have loving relationships with other people who encourage them and are there for them, and all these things. So, I mean, it's just proof that that passage is right in First John, that there already are people who look at Christians and go, wow, that is something that is just uncommon. That is something unique, and that's something I'm jealous of. So when it comes to actively wanting people to know who Jesus is, it just starts with taking what's unique and what you love and just trying to like share that with others. And I know I don't want to harp on this too much, because if you were here for the interacting with God's or interacting with the lost world, you went through 5 weeks of this already. If not, feel free to maybe talk to a friend or someone in your small group about that. But really what it comes down to is you and your life and your experience with Jesus is intentionally designed to build a bridge with the people around you. So when you share about what Jesus has done and is doing in your life, when you share about why Jesus, like why you wanted to follow Jesus. Another thing I think I mentioned before is in that mission trip I led over to Wales. The main focus point of the mission trip was that the juniors and seniors in high school I was with, they sat in public schools over there, their classes, they have a religion class, and basically they got to teach as guest teachers like the Christian part of their curriculum, like when they were going over Christianity as a religion. And we had these really like purposeful and designed like presentations. And we went over a bunch of stuff, and just how the presentations were designed, and just out of like natural belief, you're anticipating people to ask you like really tough questions for you to defend the faith. Like, how do you know the resurrection is real when this? How do you know like creation is real when all of this is about evolution? And we had one or two of those, but the number one question that was asked every single time, and we prepared our students for this, is no matter what we talked about, their only question was, why do you follow Jesus? They were like, you are like this American who has now flown like 12 plus hours and rode in an 8-hour shuttle to come to little old Wales, because in their mind, Wales is like this backcountry rural part of the world. So they're like, you came all the way to us on your spring break and paid money to tell us about Jesus. Like, why? Like, why do you care about Jesus and us knowing him that much? And that was just such an awesome moment each time, because they were like, well, we prepared our students to be like, you need to have an answer to that. Why do you follow Jesus? Why? And that was some of the most interacting, I want to say life-changing for both our students and those students' interactions that people had, as they were able to answer the question, why do I follow Jesus? So I would strongly encourage you this week that to be the starting point. If you can't answer the question, why do I follow Jesus? Sit down, pray about it, talk to your small group leader, talk to a parent, talk to someone you trust, figure out an answer to that question. Why do you follow Jesus? Because ultimately, and I'm just going to tell you the truth, if you are genuinely trying to have people know who Jesus is, that's going to be a question that comes up every single time, because they're going to want to know what's your motive. That's people want to know people's motives in life. So I would heavily start off with you being able to answer the question, why do I follow Jesus? And then the second thing, and this is where really talking to your small groups would help, is what are ways for you to connect with others? What are ways that you naturally connect with people? I know that's something we've already talked about, so maybe this will be an easier conversation in your small groups. But it's just important to understand, and I keep on bringing this up, that all of these aspects of being a Christ follower involve intentionality. These are not flippant. These are not accidental things that will happen. So if you go into your group and you're like, well, I just do it. Like, that's not an answer. Sorry. Like, most of the leaders are going to be like, well, how? Like, well, it just happens. What do you mean how? This isn't like breathing where you just breathe. Like, this isn't like eating where like most time at some point you're just going to eat food. This is a active pursuit we all have to have in our life. We're either not doing it and we aren't pursuing it, or we pursue it and we do it. There's not really too much of a gray area, which I know is sometimes a hard pill to swallow for many of us. I know for me it's a hard pill to swallow, that if I feel like I'm not doing it, there's no gray area. That means I'm not doing it and I need to fix it. This isn't one of those gray areas of life. But do you have any other comments? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think answering that question as far as why are you following Jesus, that's huge, right? Because it is a choice. It gets brought up in church all the time. This isn't your parents' pursuit that you just get to tag along on. Like, this isn't just something by chance. It is an active choice that if you are a disciple of Christ that you've made. First week you talked about submitting to Christ, right? Is it something? It's not a one-time thing. It's a daily thing. So why are you daily doing this? Same thing with repentance. This is off topic, but it came up as I was reading something where repentance is not a one-time thing. It's a daily thing. Everything that we do as a disciple of Christ is not just a one-time event. It is a daily thing in our life, or at least it should be. I think the only other thing is going back to the parable of the sower, because that's ultimately what we're doing, is we are sowing seeds. And it's not, we don't determine where those seeds fall. You build relationships, you have that interaction, you have that proximity, you can answer the question as to why you're doing it. All of you're sowing those seeds for other disciples to come and follow Christ. You don't determine where they grow, you don't determine how they grow, but it doesn't remove the responsibility to faithfully sow the seeds. We have to be sowing the seeds. You have to be going through this process. It's a command to make disciples, to teach. It's a command. You have to be doing it, but you aren't responsible for the outcome. Some sow, some water. It's God that gives the increase. It's the work of the Holy Spirit in hearts. Why? Because there's going to be those relationships that you build a relationship, you have those friends, you try to be as faithful, you work faithfully, you try to be faithful, and there's no increase, at least from what you can see. That doesn't mean there will never be, but don't get discouraged. Just sow the seeds. Yeah.
Closing thought for me is, piggyback off of what you said, is something I've told a lot of people during this time and had to tell myself, is that God's timing is perfect. Pastor Scott the other week mentioned in a topic about God's knowledge that it's perfect and what that means, but God's timing is perfect. So even though it doesn't fit our timing is not perfect. God's timing is perfect. So let that be an encouragement to you that even if it doesn't make sense, God's timing is perfect, and there has to be trust and faith in that. But I love all of you guys. I miss you a lot. Hopefully we will be able to start meeting together and seeing each other soon, but stay tuned for what we're continuing to do in the ministry. And I hope you guys are able to do well, but I miss you guys, and I'll see you soon.
Later days.